All right, so we have different models to account for how our attention system works. The first one is called a filter model, and it's a lot like an on-off switch. The model says that any unattended stimuli, anything that you're not paying attention to, is like the light is in the off position for that. You just literally are not processing that information at all. All attention is focused on whatever the stimulus is that you have chosen to place your attention on. So you either have your attention on the stimulus or you do not. It's not possible to be sort of tracking certain parts and sort of tracking other parts. You either are paying attention to something or you are not. So under the filter models, we have early selection filter models that say that that you filter the information early. You make your selection early, and the switch model is a good example of that. In this model, your attention gets attracted a lot of the times by the stimulus rather than you choosing as you enter a new field of things that you could pay attention to. I choose to look for things that are red. Like that's not how the attention is placed according to the switch model. Instead, you experience a field of stimuli and certain things will catch your attention and pull them. Your attention will be pulled by certain physical characteristics. Once you've placed your attention, then you will engage in pattern recognition, which is what we talked about in the last chapter, right? So you have to attend to something before you can recognize what it is, according to this model. According to this model, there's no preconscious processing where you sort of just know that it's there without even having paid attention to it. You have to be paying attention consciously. In this model, anything that you're not paying attention to, any kind of unattended stimuli will fade from your sensory register. So, maybe it crossed your eye and it landed on your retina and it's being stored there for a few milliseconds in case you want to pay attention. But if you don't pay attention to it, it just fades away as though you never even saw it, as though it never crossed your retina. So that's an on-off switch. And a lot of people say, that doesn't really describe all of attention, because it seems like sometimes I can pay attention to some things to a certain degree and other things to another degree. Usually it's like a lot of my attention will be placed on one thing and then some amount of my attention, like the remaining attention could be placed on something else. This kind of logic is described by the attenuator model. So here we have a picture of a light switch that you might have encountered in your life where maybe yours didn't have numbers on it like this one does, but you can turn the knob and you can, it's a dimmer switch. You can make a brighter light or you can make a dimmer light based on how you're turning the knob, right? Well, that kind of knob is called an attenuator, and you have it on like a volume. Any kind of volume knob that you might have, that's an attenuator type of thing. Your stove top might have a knob that's an attenuator type of knob where you could have hotter or colder coils if it's electric, or higher or lower gas flames if it's natural gas. So an attenuator is a knob that can turn it on more or less, right? Probably the way that your shower works is like that, where you can make the water warmer or colder by turning the knob. So you have lots of experience with attenuators in your life, and the idea of a filter model working on an attenuator kind of makes sense in certain ways. It's kind of analogous to the cascade model of processing that I talked about, I think back in the first chapter. The idea that maybe you're processing some information and maybe it's accumulating a lot of your cognitive capacity, but once you've gotten to a certain point, or if it's not occupying too much of your attention, you can place some of your remaining cognitive resources onto something else, right? And it's like in a cascade where you can keep passing along available cognitive resources as they get freed up. So in this model, you can pay attention to more than one stimulus, but none of those stimuli that you're paying attention to are going to get full attention. You can't have full attention on more than one thing. That sort of makes sense, doesn't it? But you don't have to do like 50-50 on two different stimuli. You could have maybe 90% of your attention on one and 10% of your attention on the other. I'll give you an example of situations where you may have been in that condition. Like maybe you're waiting for a notification to come, or something on your phone, and in the meantime you're brushing your teeth and you're heating something up in the microwave, so you're hearing beeps from it, and you're hearing, like, you're doing other kinds of things while at the same time attending to the possibility that a notification might come up on your phone, right? Waiting for that noise that your phone makes or that vibration that your phone will give you. That's a good example of how you can kind of like be listening with one ear is an old phrase that describes that, that I'm listening with one ear for that other signal, that other indicator that, the thing I'm waiting for has arrived. You can kind of do it a lot more easily if you have stimuli in different modalities, right? So if you're processing visual stimuli, it's easier to give part of your attention to like tracking with your ears for something. It's harder if you have like two visual stimuli and you're trying to bounce back and forth between them. That's a little trickier. You have to bounce back and forth, as opposed to like if they're in different modalities, you can kind of track them simultaneously. One probably needs to be more automatic than the other for you to be able to divide really well like that. So listening for a tone is a little bit more automatic than actively putting toothpaste on your toothbrush and actively brushing your teeth and like that. So the attenuator model does say that you can divide your attention, but there are certain ways that you can make that more efficient, right? By dividing your attention on things that are very different from each other and so on. Your attention in this model will be focused on the physical characteristics, kind of like the switch model said that your attention will get pulled by physical characteristics. But this model also adds in semantic characteristics. And I think this is the first time I've used that word in this class. So let me go ahead and clarify that the word semantic means two different things in cognitive psychology. One of them has to do with a type of memory store, so I'm going to leave that for later when we talk about memory. And I'm going to use the other definition right now, which semantic literally means meaning. Semantic is another way of saying the meaning of something. So if something is highly meaningful, it will attract your attention. If it's something that is particularly meaningful to you, or if it's particularly meaningful to this situation, it'll pull your attention. So both of these models can be characterized as being stimulus driven, right? The switch model says it's driven by the physical characteristics. The attenuator model says it's the physical characteristics and or the meaning characteristics, right? The semantic characteristics. But it's characteristics of the stimulus that's going to determine your attention. All right. Okay. Hopefully this will run. There's nothing to hear on this, so hopefully it'll just look okay to you on this video. I'll also put it in the playlist so that you can see it there too, but I'm going to go ahead and show it to you here. So motion catches our attention, right? Motion attracts attention. So that makes a stimulus more salient when it moves. I happen to live in a wooded area and we have animals that come through all the time. We'll have moose and we'll have deer. I live over on, well, I won't say where I live anyway. So we'll have moose, we'll have deer, we'll have turkeys, quail, bunnies. We just have all sorts of things that walk through our property. And it'll be really interesting because we'll see it when it's moving, and then we'll run go get the binoculars or the camera, depending on what kind of creature it is. And if it like heard us scurrying around in the house, it'll oftentimes freeze, and then we can't find it again until it moves. Like you cannot find it, and our attention is on it. We're scanning and we're looking. But certain kinds of characteristics will pull our attention, and movement is one of those. If something moves, we tend to look at it. And this goes back to when we were talking about the visual system and how there are lots of rods out in the periphery of your retina, and that those rods are really sensitive to motion. So we have very sensitive cells for detecting that motion has occurred, and that pulls our attention. Motion is a very important factor, right? Like if something's moving, we want to know what it is. So when we say that something's salient, it means that it's relevant, it's noticeable, it's meaningful. Another salient characteristic would be the color of something, particularly if you have a color that is different from everything else so that it's standing out. A red circle in a field of green circles is certainly the more salient of the circles, right? It's going to pull our attention because it's the one that's different. And so a lot of times when presented with stimuli, the thing that is a different color will make us say, what's that? Size is another factor that pulls our attention. So here I found a group of kids, they're all the same size except for one of them is much taller. So that person is the one who's going to pull our attention. The one who's much different, much different in size. It could be everybody's the same size and one is much smaller, and that would catch our attention. So size can be another factor, right, that'll pull our attention. Orientation. I found this picture on the internet where somebody was very annoyed by the tile layer because there's this one tile that's kind of sticking out, right? If everything else is organized in a particular way and one is just a little off of that orientation, it pulls our attention. So these are the kinds of physical characteristics that we're talking about when we say these pull our attention. All right, so research in the, I think probably 40s, 50s, 60s really were focusing on which of these early filter models really made sense for how we apply our attention. One way that they tested how filtering occurs and when filtering occurs was through the use of what's called a dichotic listening task. So di means two and cotic refers to your ears. So we're going to have two streams of information being played simultaneously, one to each ear. So you have to have, back then they were very specialized headphones and equipment, but of course today you're completely familiar with Dolby kinds of sound inputs where different things are coming out of different speakers, and so this isn't like as much magic to a modern person as it was to back in the old days when they set this up. But so you have these two different trains of thought going into into each ear, and the researcher tells the participant, focus in on what's happening in your left ear and ignore what's happening on your right ear. So in the right ear, the horse has galloped across the field. In the left ear, the one that you're supposed to attend to or listen to would be President Lincoln, often read by the light of the fire. And so what we're interested in is how well the person tracks what's going on in that left ear. They've been told to pay attention to the left ear. But the problem that researchers quickly discovered is that you can't really control the subject's tendency to switch attention to the unattended ear. They would recall little details from the right ear and have missed details on the left ear. Sometimes they'd fill in with guesses on the left ear to compensate for the fact that they remembered something on the right ear. You couldn't really control that tendency to hop back and forth. So then they evolved a little bit in the design, and they said, well, let's do shadowing tasks where now you have the same setup, but your job as the subject is not only to listen to what's on the left ear, but shadow it. So you're like one word behind it. So it's like President, President, Lincoln, Lincoln, often, often, red, red, right? Like you're saying exactly the same things out loud as are occurring in the left ear. It's going to prevent you from shifting your attention, or if you do shift your attention, you're going to be like President Lincoln, often read by the horses, and we're going to know you switched because we can hear what you're saying. So it's a good check on the manipulation of, just listen to the left ear. We'll know whether that was happening or not based on how the shadowing goes. The thing that they discovered from both of these tasks, and the shadowing task clarified that it really was happening at the pre-attentive level, is that even though in a shadowing task the person correctly shadowed what was happening on the left ear, they still could recall certain details from the unattended ear. They would remember that there was a horse. Maybe, just big vague things. They didn't have the details of how the thing was written or whatever, but they'd have certain details that had caught their attention, probably pulled their attention. So when they initially found that in dichotic listening tasks, they were like, well, maybe the person was hopping back and forth, and we told them to listen to their left ear, but they maybe went over and listened to the right ear. With the shadowing task, they could focus in on just those participants who didn't make any mistakes in the shadowing. So clearly they were doing the task, they were paying attention to the left ear, and yet they'd still remember details from the right ear. It shows that you don't have to be paying attention to actually process information. All right, let's go ahead and stop here, and we'll come back in the next one and talk about the late selection filter models.